What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program episode. And in this video, I will be showcasing some of the features which are now available to get, to play, to witness, to experience in Kerbal Space Program version 1.9, which came out today for me, which is Thursday the 13th of February. So for you guys, I'm guessing it'll be the 15th if I continue with my normal schedule uploads, which is, you know, a Kerbal video every Saturday. But I was really excited for this update for one thing, really. It adds fuel valves, as in you can now dump fuel, which is a feature I've been requesting for years at this point, and we now finally have the ability to dump fuel, which is excellent. It comes with a few other things as well, which I'll be showcasing throughout this video. Not everything, but a few of the things. One of the big things I'll be showcasing in this video will be the revamped textures of not only Kerbin, which has, you know, had a nice facelift since the last version of the game, but also there's been an update to Moho and Dres, so they look much nicer. And if it's anything, if we've learned anything from the recent updates to Juna, Mun, Ike, Minmus, Eve, Gilly, I think that was it in terms of the revamp so far, it's going to look pretty good. So I really wanted to go ahead and see for myself exactly what the new updates to the Dres Canyon would be, because the Dres Canyon is quite possibly my favorite place to visit in this game. I know, yes, it's a haha funny meme. What is Dres? Dres doesn't exist. But guys, the Dres Canyon is definitely one of the best geographical features, geological features, I should say, in the whole of Kerbal Space Program. So I wholeheartedly encourage anyone to go and visit the planet at some point. And, you know, it is a fairly challenging destination to reach, which is probably why it's somewhat unpopular as a thing to visit. But the canyon, I think, really helps seal the deal. So, the rocket I'm building is nothing much to comment on, really. In fact, it's very similar to the last rocket I built when I went to Dres. I think it was during a Dres Blunderbirds episode, which was, my god, how long ago was that? A long time ago. So I think it's, you know, I think it's an acceptable amount of time has passed since I built a rocket that looked like this, and there have been a few little improvements. For starters, you can see I'm adding these ladders to the side of the main nuclear stage, just so that the Kerbal can transfer out of the main cockpit, just traverse the ladder down to the lander so that it can be flown to the front of the ship, because as you can see, this is a somewhat this is an Apollo style setup in that the lander sits below the command module, and so the rocket will need to be reassembled before those nuclear engines can fire. But this rocket has a few unusual design choices which will materialize in due course. One of the things I wanted to showcase was some of the new revamped parts. As I've said, a new part has been added in the form of a fuel valve, which I'm not even sure if I've added to the rocket just yet, but I will add it, don't worry. The other thing that's been added, it's not really been added, but it's been revamped at the very least. The long outdated mainsail and skipper engines have finally received the facelift that they deserve, and so I'm going to showcase the mainsail and the skipper in this rocket, which is why I'm building a 2.5 meter diameter fairing. Usually I try and select the fairing base based on the idea that the fairing doesn't have to become wider than its base, if that makes sense. I don't really know how to properly describe the appearance of it, but you see what I'm doing here? The fairing is wider than its base. I try and avoid that usually, even though it's not always realistic. It's just a kind of design style that I like, but obviously we're going to be using the 2.5 meter parts to show off. There's the new mainsail and the new skipper was placed above. You'll get a better view of them when we're in flight. We had to use a fairing that was slightly too narrow than what I would have liked to have used, but you know, hopefully it's still a realistic looking rocket nonetheless. And we're going for a kind of Falcon heavy sort of appearance to the lower stage, I suppose. But we're going for a classic Falcon Heavy, in that it's going to be the two side boosters feed fuel into the central core, which was how the Falcon Heavy was originally going to work before it was dubbed too complicated. Now, you can see we're placing some SRBs here, not necessarily because we really need them, but because, again, this is another part that's had a nice revamped style, and that is the Thumper SRB. It was always kind of the odd one out. Ever since all the SRBs got nice graphical updates, this was kind of left in the dark. No longer the case. So we now have revamped Thumpers, which I'll be showcasing once we launch the rocket. But before we can launch, we have to time warp around to a Dres transfer window. An optimal transfer window for Dres is about 90 degrees. And by 90 degrees, I mean, of course, if you draw a line from Kerbin to the sun to Dres, the angle that forms at the sun should be about 90 degrees. Well, technically I think it's 88.8, but let's be real, 90 degrees. In fact, I didn't actually get it perfect, you may notice on the map screen, but it doesn't matter. The sun is rising on the launch pad, which means that it is time to launch, I suppose. We can just go ahead and do that. So as you can see, we've got a nice blazing start. The rocket's not actually going as fast as the footage might suggest. I am playing the footage back at fairly high speed. I'm guessing you guys know what a rocket launch looks like at this point, and you know, I think it's a bit more satisfying almost to watch rocket launches played back at super fast speeds and really get a good sense of that gravity turn. Didn't check my staging, as you may have noticed, and I had to kind of detach the SRBs 2x2, but hey, yeah, maybe that could be done in real life to ensure that as each pair separates, it clears before we detach the next set. I don't know, in order to minimize the separate boosters colliding in midair. Let's go with that. Anyway, my incompetencies aside, of course, we have a beautiful shot of those three we have a beautiful shot of that one mainsail engine with its fantastic new look and new plume to it. Looks very reminiscent of the Vulcane 2.1, in fact. I think, is that the Muse? I don't know. But I really like how it looks with that triple nozzle appearance. I mean, it's not really a triple nozzle. It's got the main engine bell, and I think the two little nozzles that sort of flank it are turbo pump exhausts, although I could be wrong. So if someone wants to correct me, please leave a comment down below. But I think the little secondary rocket engine things are actually just turbo pump exhaust manifolds. I'm no expert. I ain't Scott Manley, I ain't. Anyway, it doesn't matter, because the engine is now gone, and this one definitely has one engine bell, and that is of course the skipper, which looks a lot more similar to its original appearance than the mainsail does, but nonetheless it is still a very nice and welcome upgrade regardless. As we power our way up into orbit, of course we're not going to get into orbit using this stage. I don't like to enter a circular orbit using an expendable dumb booster, because I don't like leaving debris left floating around in space. These space dolphins are a cause that it's very close to my heart, so I don't want to endanger the wildlife up here. So just before we fully circularize and raise our periapsis clear of the atmosphere, we're going to just dump that lower stage. However, first things first, it is a race against the clock, my dudes, to get the lander moved to the front of the craft so that we can safely fire those nuclear engines and complete our circularization burn. So Jeb needs to get into the lander and reconfigure the vessel in record time, because obviously if we don't sort this out before we reach periapsis, we're going to just re-enter the atmosphere and the mission will be over very, very prematurely. So off we go. We're going to use the RCS ports on board this lander to get it shot over to the front of the craft. The main vessel itself, of course, will have nothing really to do with the docking itself, but it's a fairly trivial matter. At the end of the day, we started in the correct position in terms of our, I guess, lateral positioning. All we need to do is just up, across, and then down again. So it's not a particularly challenging dock, to say the least. You know, we'll be doing a much more. It's not a challenging dock later, but it's certainly a much more conventional style of docking when we actually, you know, get this lander off the surface of Dres back to the mothership. But there we are. The ship is configured. We've got plenty of time to form our circularization burn, so we can go ahead and just time warp up. Now, one thing you've got to be very careful of if you use a ship like this is that you disable cross-feed between those docking ports, because otherwise the nuclear engines are just going to start draining the fuel reserves of the lander itself, which in this case wouldn't be too much of a disaster, because it would be very easy to just pump fuel from the main rocket to the lander, because there's only one fuel tank in the lander. But some landers I built, especially things like Eve landers where there's lots and lots of tanks, it's a real pain to transfer the fuel back. So just make sure you do it as a good force of habit. Now, as you can see, the maneuver nodes are kind of broken in this update. I don't know why. What I like to do for Dres, because as you can see, Dres's orbit is at a big, big tilt. So I initially just make a maneuver node to get our apoapsis to kind of a level with Dres's orbit, and knowing full well that we're not going to get a Dres intercept immediately because Dres is on a tilt. And then I create a second maneuver node on that initial maneuver node course to see how much tilt we would need to do in our mid-course correction to get our Dres encounter. And then, depending on how that goes, I can then tweak the first maneuver. I hope all this makes sense. Doesn't matter though, because in this case, it didn't work. You know, the maneuver node maker, it doesn't... This happened a couple of times in this mission where I wanted to make another maneuver node on another maneuver node's path, and the node just doesn't work. So I think this is just a bug with 1.9, possibly. So it might well be fixed. This commentary could be outdated before it even goes live. They might fix this bug before Saturday for me. So just to let you know, this bug may or may not still be in the game. And obviously, if you're watching this years down the line, wow, you know, it's a privilege. It feels weird thinking that there would be people possibly years down the line watching this, and it's like a snippet to the past, which is where I am. Hi. Here's something that I did. I was doing a quick inspection of the ship and noticed that this adapter piece here, I forgot to drain the oxidizer from it whilst in the vehicle assembly building, but now it's not a problem. We can use the new fuel valve to dump that fuel and give ourselves some more delta V by dumping all that unnecessary weight, because of course nuclear engines can't use and don't use oxidizer to provide thrust, so we can just dump it, and hey, there is a real life use of the fuel drain valve. Just in case any of you are wondering what the point would be, there's an excellent example of how it comes in handy. Obviously, you know, I play it up as being like, oh my goodness, how could this have happened? It was, I did deliberately leave the oxidizer in that tank, but it was to show you something that, you know, is a useful thing for this valve, because although I left it in that tank deliberately this time around, there have been missions where I have forgotten to drain it, and it's like, oh wow, I'm now, you know, several hundred delta V short of what I could potentially be if I just remembered to drain that fuel. So there we are. Anyway, here you can see me making another maneuver node along our course, just to get our inclination sorted out and get ourselves on a Dres encounter. And as you can see, I had to change prograde, retrograde, radial in, radial out a little bit, because I couldn't refine those aspects of our orbit whilst we were still at Kerbin, because I couldn't see how the tilt would affect the final outcome during that maneuver node planning, because of course I somehow couldn't make another maneuver node along the original maneuver node's course. I feel like as I say this, it's really confusing, but I hope it all makes sense in the context of you seeing my struggles materialize on the screen, at least, you know, when they happened. Anyway, let's just talk about something else. We're getting towards the maneuver node, and we can just execute that burn. You may notice below the estimated burn time, it says when to start your burn, which is an excellent feature that was added not too long ago in the game, and it is something I've already fallen in love with. I believe, again, at the time of recording, they may have changed it so it's actually default, but you have to go into the game settings and enable advanced burn indicator, I believe it's called, and then this thing just appears and it tells you the optimal time to start your burn. I always used to say there was a rule of thumb where you take the estimated burn time, cut it in half, and when that is the time to your maneuver node, that's when you start your burn. But now the game does it for you, and actually does it optimally, because like I say, that cutting it in half, blah, 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 that's only a very general estimate. It doesn't take into account things like the amount your weight is going to change, or what have you during the burn, but this thing does. It's much smarter. So do it. Everyone watching this video, just set this enable this in the settings of your game. And here we are, entering Dres's sphere of influence momentarily, actually. Managed to talk for most of the flight without really discussing much of the detail, but I suppose there wasn't that much detail to discuss, to be honest. I did forget entirely to comment on the beautiful aesthetic of Kerbin on the launch pad. You may have noticed it looked much, much nicer, but don't worry. When we go back to Kerbin later on, we get another opportunity to see its surface. But right now, it is time to marvel on the other revamped surface in this game. That was a terrible transition, but here it is. It is Dres. And it's got a nice revamped surface. I mean, it's not. It doesn't look that great from this high up, admittedly. But as we get closer and closer, and of course when we ultimately land in the canyon and fly past its sheer cliffs, it does look pretty breathtaking. I am once again in awe of the hard work of the developers at Squad. Not only because like this is a free update as well, but it does really, really enhance my enjoyment of the game. Like that was one of my bigger, not issues, but things I wished could be better about the game, is that all the planets were basically just a bit ugly. They were just a bit of a blurry mess, and they were all just the same texture across their whole surface. Things like this really changed that, so that's good. Anyway, you may see on the map screen there's that sort of black, smudgy line on the surface of Dres. That's the canyon. It's a very big boy. So it's very easy to find on the map screen. You haven't got to worry about, using the Easter egg finder thing that's part of some of the probe cores. You can just see it on the map. It ain't no Monarch. It's pretty good. So it's a very easy geographical site to visit. I keep saying a geographical site. I mean geological site, of course. I mean, if I use it wrong, it's because I'm just so excited because I love visiting it. But yeah, the more astute among you when you're watching the time-lapse may have noticed that this is no ordinary lander. Well, I mean, it is, but it does have lots of cool things packed inside it, namely the deployable science units that come with the Breaking Ground DLC pack. I did admittedly forget to put a scanning arm on board because I forgot that there are actually scannable things inside the Dres Canyon. So sorry about that, but hey, it's not a big deal, to be honest. It means I've got to worry too much about picking my landing spot so terribly precisely. We can just land somewhere flat and then just have a little EVA, deploy our science, take some nice Instagram, Snapchats, all that good stuff before having to head back to the mothership and go home. There is the canyon, of course, looming ahead. We can go ahead and hop our way over there, and yeah, get ready to experience. I'm just looking at the footage, just thinking, it does. That surface does look like something, doesn't it? It's definitely a huge step up over what it was. But look at the cliff edges. Like, it looks like the cliff edges themselves have been, that someone has gone and custom done that. I assume, as a non-game artist. Like, I've never worked on a video game, so I don't know how it works. But look at that. We can actually get a better look here by using another feature that was added in Kerbal Space Program 1.9, and that is if you press Escape and then press F2 to disable the UI. Not sure what the equivalent, if there is an equivalent button, is on console, but on PC, you press Escape, press F2 to disable the UI, and then you can just move the camera around freely and get lots of beauty shots like that. So this is going to be great when it comes to me making thumbnails. Like, if you want to check out, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna promote the second channel. If you want to check out how I make thumbnails, a lot of the time what I do is I take the vessel, turn all the engines on and all that, but then just use Vessel Mover to just move it above the ground, turn off the UI, and thereby remove all the lines that Vessel Mover has in its UI. And I just take a screenshot and then Photoshop it, do that sort of thing. And this just makes things so much easier, because during flight, I could just press Escape and take all the time in the world getting a nice epic angle to capture a nice thumbnail shot. I'll probably still do the other way, because I'm a dinosaur, and this is how I've always done it. But, very occasionally, this will be a really nice quality of life improvement. And here we are touching down a textbook landing. So the retrograde hold, the automatic retrograde hold thing on the nav board didn't disable upon touchdowns. We did do a bit of a flip, but it was fine. I like to add a bit of excitement to my Kerbals lives. And here we are. We time warped down to the day, and we get an excellent shot of the Dres Canyon in fully illuminated glory. And of course, we can open up the side panels of our lander, and we can get ready to deploy the field science and do some. We're not going to get anything because this is just a sandbox save I have for when I'm just showcasing new versions of the game. So we're not going to get any science for Lowne Aerospace, but nonetheless, we can place the Lowne Aerospace flag regardless, because we are symbolically still working for that space agency. I'm not going to show the full deployment of all of the ground units. I can just crossfade to every single piece of deployment, and you can hear the buzzing and the whirring. Oh, this is my favorite. I'm not going to say anything because this is so satisfying to place down. Ready? Boop. Oh, it's so cool. I love that. The only reason I brought all this stuff with me is because I just love watching everything just unfold. Like, it's so cool. I love it. It's literally, get the DLC just because it's this cool stuff. I love it so much. The propellers and rotors are probably the more significant additions, but I love the deployable science. I don't know why I don't use it in videos more. I think it's just because it takes such a long time to set up the ground stations I don't like my videos, taking too long. I already feel like they are a bit too long anyway. And I feel like the deployment of ground stations just elongates them a little bit too much. But maybe you guys disagree. Maybe you guys like watching me do more surface shenanigans when I visit planets, moons, and, there are no other places you can visit. I guess you could visit asteroids, and Gilly is technically a captured asteroid, but the sentiment is still the same, I think. Jebediah does a little flip, Is that Jebediah? I think it's Jebediah. I can't actually see the screen very well because Sony Vegas' preview is a bit blurry. But I did the little flip there. He basically slammed into the ground at full whack just because the seismometer can actually detect when a Kerbal lands next to it. It will give you a little spike on the seismometer reading, which is a nifty little feature. Anyway, we haven't a moment to lose. We can get back into our lander and we can analyze some of the rocks that Jeb and Bob collected on the surface. There they are in the lab. Of course, I'm joking. You can't actually interact with that laboratory, but it's a nice little internal feature of that lander can that you may not have been aware was there. There's that lab. And then we can just time warp around to a point where our mothership's orbit somewhat passes over us, and we can get an encounter more easily. But, it is hard to get into a nice, accurate orbit from the depths of the Dres Canyon because you can't just start flying flat immediately, which is what you would do in an ideal world on an atmosphereless planet. Oh, doing another little freeze frame pan around, getting a nice little shot. Ah, that is a great shot right there. Yeah, as I was saying, you've got to, you can't fly flat immediately, which is what you would do on a planet such as Dres normally. Whoop, became a little bit close for comfort just there. But as you can see, we've got a very hump-like trajectory just there on the map screen. Normally, I try and go for a very flat ascent on planets with no atmosphere, or at least very, very thin atmospheres, just because it means we've got plenty of time to catch up to our target. The lower you are and the closer you are to the surface of a planet, the faster you move. So when we're behind the target, such as a case like this, we can catch up to it by the time we reach apoapsis, and our encounter is pretty good. However, because I had to ascend out of the canyon, I ended up going on a slightly steeper trajectory than I normally end up going on, so we are quite a bit behind. So what we're going to do is burn. It ultimately meant we had to do quite an aggressive burn at apoapsis to make sure we'd be getting a nice encounter with our ship soon. So we had to do quite a lot of, retrograde burning relative to our target once we approached it, but it was worth it. It means that we didn't have to spend too much time away from the mothership, or at least not as much time as we would have had to spend had we tried to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit more fuel conscious throughout this mission. At the end of the day, we have surplus Delta V on this lander. I was willing to expend a bit of extra fuel to make sure our Kerbals could be reunited all the more sooner. That was definitely a grammatically correct sentence. Now, we're going to be docking these two ships together without monopropellant just because we can and because it's dead easy. And I've shown you how to do this many times, but I'll just talk about it again because, some of you may not have seen my previous missions where we did a docking in this style. We're going to basically start by having both of the docking ports set as the control point for each vessel and just have them point towards each other by, pointing them towards the target node on their respective nav balls, and just have SAS just automatically hold the target, is what I would normally say. There is no pilot aboard the mothership, unfortunately, so that particular node is grayed out. So every now and then I'll be switching back to the mothership just to make sure that it is, maintaining alignment with the target's docking port. And as you can see, they drifted towards each other and docked without any issues whatsoever. So now most of the challenging parts of the mission are now done. We can reunite our space progs and get ready to once again use the fuel drain valve. Another great function it serves. I could, I guess, if we wanted to be super efficient, I could now dip our periapsis to, impact Dres' surface, ditch our lander, and then recircularize before the mothership hits the surface. But, it's a long way back to Kerbin. If we leave the lander attached just there, it means there is more space for the Kerbals to move around. And in fact, they've each got their own little room. Jebediah can have the Apollo command pod. Bob can have the lab module, which is the lander can, and Bill can have the hitchhiker storage modules. There's 3 little rooms, gives them a nice area to relax on. However, I've kind of it took so long to get to this point, I've now done it, but there is oxidizer stuck in that lander, which means there is excess weight in that lander which we can't use, so we can just dump it using the fuel drain valve. We can use the liquid fuel, of course, in the nuclear engine, so it gives us a nice little boost of Delta V. I'm not sure if the added dry mass of the lander makes up for the extra fuel that we gain from its fuel tank. I mean, it definitely doesn't, in fact, because we could just transfer the fuel from the lander before we dump it. But like I say, I'd quite like having the 3 rooms there, and we can quite easily, as you can see, get an encounter directly from Dres. We didn't have to do any playing around with, radial in, radial out, and normal and anti-normal either. We just managed to get it through pulling on the prograde marker alone, which is a nice convenience. Normally, it can be a little bit difficult to get to force, I should say, a interplanetary encounter without being at an optimal transfer window, but in this case, everything came together just fine. Of course, we're not at an optimal transfer window, so it is a bit of a eccentric Kerbin re-entry. We're going to be entering at very, very high speed, so we don't have the Delta V to do anything, actually. We pretty much use up the rest of our fuel during this maneuver burn, but we would be using it. We would require a lot of fuel to circularize at Kerbin. However, of course, Kerbin has an atmosphere. And again, the eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that during the construction of this vessel, and indeed throughout this entire video, you may have noticed that there is in fact a very, very large heat shield on the underside of the command module, which means we can easily re-enter Kerbin's atmosphere at very, very high speeds and not have to worry about, you know, the effects of re-entry heating. And of course, Kerbals, they're pretty hardy things. They can take very, very high G-forces during re-entry, so that's going to be fine as well. You may also notice that there are some landing legs on the command module, and the reason for this, well, there are a couple of reasons for this. The first thing is because I wanted to show off some of Kerbin's, you know, new revamped ultra high quality terrain, and so we can do that by landing on some of the terrain. And also, it's kind of talk about one of my other gripes with the game that I really hope gets fixed soon, because the stock water still looks terrible. Like, water in my videos looks amazing because I use the mod Scatterer. But it would be really nice if Squad could just incorporate it. I know it has its glitches, but so does the game, as I've showcased during this video, for example, with the Maneuver Node Maker. I can take the glitches of Scatterer because the actual effects it adds are so amazing. And look at Kerbin right now. Looks alright, but where are the clouds? Why can't we have stock clouds? I have seen developers post screenshots of them in their game, and they have cloud mods. So I know that they agree that clouds make the game look better. So Squad, I really, really like the work you've done with Kerbin, but please can we have nice water and added clouds? That would be great. So that's on my wish list of next things to revamp. It would be nice to get a revamped Lathe as well, actually, so I can finally restart life on Lathe. Here's a little shot, by the way. I thought I'd use the screenshot, you know, freeze frame viewer one last time to get a nice glimpse of the final moments of the nuclear stage as it dumps nuclear waste into the atmosphere. I didn't think this re-entry through. We'll just move along. This isn't my main save. Don't worry, guys. This isn't Lowne Aerospace. It's safe. We don't have to worry. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up this mission. So in terms of where to go now, I guess next week I might try and showcase some of the other stuff that's been added in this update, like rotors and stuff in the form of maybe a quadcopter to Juna, now that our Juna-based mission is well underway. Or alternatively, we could do a Moho mission. That's another thing I could do. Maybe leave a comment below saying what you think I should do for next week's video. Moho, or, you know, quadcopter, or some other feature of KSP 1.9 I've not talked about or discussed. You know, it's up to you. I may do something else entirely, but I will still maybe read your comment. And there we are. We are now parachuting down at painfully slow speed, so we decided to spice up the descent by having Jebediah action man his way down with his parachute. And yeah, now we can get to the main part of this video, really. And that is, of course, the whiskey review. As I've said, this video is not intended for people under the age of 13 because it is first and foremost a whiskey review channel that sometimes shows some Kerbal Space Program content. And today's whiskey that we will be reviewing is Bell's. Oh yes. Oh yes. Bell's, generally the cheapest scotch in a shop. If it's a respectable shop, it'll be the cheapest scotch. It tastes like burn. Just burnt. That's how I would describe the taste of Bell's. And I know scotch generally has a bit of a charcoaly taste, a bit of an ashen taste. Bell's just tastes like burn. It just tastes like burn. And not because it's spicy. It just feels like you've taken some smoke and just breathed it in and then allowed it to cool and form a liquid in your mouth. And then you swallow it. And that's what Bell's tastes like. It is disgusting, but it'll still get you drunk on the cheap. And so for that reason, I give it a 3 out of 10 on my whiskey scoreboard. So there we are. There is my review of Bell's, and thus concludes today's whiskey review video. If you'd like to see more whiskey reviews, there's a playlist of them on the left-hand side. The right-hand side is just a video chosen for you by YouTube's recommendation algorithm. There's also a link to subscribe and check out my Patreon, I guess, if you would like to. And there's links in the description to Instagram, Discord, Twitter, merchandise, all the good stuff. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.